This is the Apocrypha of Azazel, and I am Azazel, the god of death. But you already knew that, right? We're again reading from my series of journals, and we're in book number 2. This is chapter number 5, and I'm calling it The Pawn of Prophecy. Before we begin, let me just address one complaint that I've received by email from some of you. You see, at the end of chapter 3, I promised to tell you about the Drokka named Hacktor Derkillez in the following chapter. Well, I lied. But 2 things I'll say on that. First off, I'm a god, and I have the right to lie if I want to. As you know, gods do that all the time. I mean, if you've read any of your holy books, you'll know that to be true. And secondly, I'm going to tell you about him in this chapter, so please stop your complaining. Now, this chapter will take place again in the Rhokii Mountains, and the timeline is 295 years after Oz. As you can see, we've jumped ahead a bit in that timeline. Now, if we're done with all of the housekeeping and complaints, let's move forward with our story. Shall we? I'd like to introduce you to a young man, a Drokka, by the name of Hacktor Derkillez. Why am I bringing him to your attention? Well, because for nearly 70 years I'd been working behind the scenes to turn his father Baldur, the king of the Drokka, into a pacifistic do-nothing whose anti-nationalistic policies were now slowly destroying the Drokka nation from the inside out. In addition to Baldur's political changes, I'd also helped the king bring even more wealth to an already rich society, sending them from the land of comfort into the land of excess. Well, to be honest, that wealth didn't actually filter down through all levels of Drokka society, as is often the case with humans. It was the top 1% who get to enjoy the luxury that is built from the backs of everybody else below them. Such was the case here, too. But the Drokka became so rich under Baldur that even the scraps that fell to the dregs of society were laced with gold. Now, very few people realized what was happening, thus only a few were unhappy. But Hacktor was among this latter group. In addition, Hacktor was Baldur's firstborn son, Reed, disgruntled heir ready to assume power. Now this made Hacktor the perfect candidate to complete my plans to not just destroy the Drokka people, but more importantly to turn the tables on Gwor and Baalzebub in the great game of the gods. At the time of our story, Hacktor had a mere 18 winters under his belt. On the day I'm telling you about, he was sitting in church with his family, and like most of you, Hacktor's mind wasn't on the service. Instead, he brooded about the following. Men go to war over black gold. Merkur says they always have and they always will, so why won't my father? Ah yes, young Hacktor chewed on that thought as he sat in the great cathedral of Itztak. In this case, the black gold which Hacktor pined for was blackwood, that most precious commodity in his part of the world and the cause of countless wars between the Drokka and their rivals during the last 3 centuries. Oh sure, Hacktor knew the stated reasons for these wars always centered around religious differences between the clans, and while he devoutly believed in the validity of those justifications, Hacktor was smart enough to know that there was also a reason behind the reason, and that the real reason was, of course, blackwood. As the son of Baldur III, heir Drokka of the Rhokies, Hacktor was a prince, and the first in line for his father's throne, the most powerful seat in the 8 kingdoms. He should have been happy, but he was far from it. For Hacktor knew that as long as Baldur was in power, there would be little chance of another war. And that meant little chance for Hacktor to fulfill his destiny and become the greatest heir who ever lived. But Baldur's inactivity had lasted long enough, and Hacktor meant to do something about it. After today, things will be different, Hacktor vowed. For you see, this was Mining Day, and Mining Day was the most important holiday on the Drokka calendar. And even more importantly, this was the day Hacktor would finally be going back to the royal court after an absence of 5 years. The world is about to change, Hacktor glowered. I know it. My father knows it. By Rhokii, this entire crowd knows it. I can feel it in the air. Now let me pause for a moment, because you may be wondering how I know Hacktor's thoughts. Or for that matter, you may be wondering if I knew everybody's thoughts, perhaps even yours right now. Well, rest assured on the latter, I don't know yours, for alas, the high god Ah has taken that power away from me. But during the time of this story, I did have the power to cast my psyche outward to hear the mind of specific individuals who were, let's just say, well, they had a penchant for the dark side. And since all humans were flawed, I could pretty much get into the mind of anyone I wanted to back at this time. Now, lest you think this was a good thing, think again, for the cacophony of humanity's thoughts could be deafening. Throughout history, mankind has accused the gods of not listening to you. But what you people don't realize is that you're like the constant bleating of mindless sheep. And it's such a nuisance that most of us gods simply turn off the noise. However, if I concentrated back then, I could cut through the noise and eventually filter out certain prospects who appeared to be aligned with my goals. There were always a few interesting voices on the wind, if you knew how to find them. Hacktor was one of my favorites. But lest you think that Hacktor was just born bad, think again. He was actually a very happy baby, and in the beginning he grew up in a loving family. I had to work hard to lure him to me behind the scenes. But my efforts were successful, as usual, and now it was time to enjoy the fruits of my labor.
May the right hand of Rhokii protect us.
Merkur the Wise called out from his place at the altar, his dark robe sucking at the glow from the candles. Mining Day was the holiday in which Merkur was the star of the show, and the old man lavished at seeing his church packed with people. After relishing the power he had to make the people speak or stay silent, at last he rang a giant gong, signaling the people's reply. From the terrors of the day. Hacktor fervently voiced the prayer's reply, along with the rest of the crowd that filled this sacred cavern. Merkur was the Drokka's high priest, and another one of my minions, although unbeknownst to him. Now, like all church services that followed man-made rules, this one too was filled with a mix of comic ritual and mindless dialogue, and the people in the crowd lapped it up like the pitiful sheep they all were, Hacktor included. And no, I'm not simply being spiteful because the service didn't worship me or any of my alter ego deities. Take faith out of the mix when you analyze any religious service and you'll see that I'm correct, if you can dare to be honest with yourself. Now, throughout the mountain kingdoms, the various clans of men that made up the Drokka people were all gathered in churches on this day, for Mining Day was the holy day that signaled the start of the Drokka New Year. Today marked the 295th time that Mining Day was being celebrated, to commemorate the time when the Drokka people first chose to delve into the earth to make their underground homes and escape the slavery of the world above. Having been instructed in the faith by Merkur himself, Hacktor well knew that the hero of Mining Day was the famed forefather Ajax the Freemaker, and that the exodus Ajax led and the underground city he founded, Oz, was the turning point in Drokka history. In fact, so important was Ajax's establishment of Oz, a quote-unquote land they could call their own, that the Drokka people created their entire time system around that event. Prior to the freedom Ajax secured for them, their period of bondage was part of an era which the scribes entered into the Drokka Chronicles as before Oz, and the period after their freedom thus became after Oz. Does the whole before Oz, after Oz time system sound familiar? Well, it's just another example of how you people can't come up with anything new. As your famous King Solomon would later say, there is nothing new under the sun. That which is now has been before. Here's yet another example. The cathedral where Hacktor attended services was overflowing, for even though this national holiday was being celebrated throughout the 8 kingdoms, because Istok was the religious capital of the empire, everybody who was anybody was here. And since Istok was the only kingdom without a cone heir, Merkur the Wise filling that function here, and he being up on the altar, there was no question who would be sitting in the front row of the church pews. The High King Baldur, along with his sons, his unmarried daughters, his top advisors, and Hacktor, his oldest son and heir. I should be up on the dais with Mirker tending the flame like the holy alkalite I am, not stuck down here with these of little faith. Hacktor still rued being forced to give up his alkalite robes now that he was leaving Iztok. He fidgeted in his seat, unable to get comfortable in the pew with Baldar, and Hector's twin sister Hekla to his right, and his brother Bran and the rest of the family to his left. Royals from each of the remaining kingdoms, along with their retinues, filled the rest of the pews, while commoners from the local communities and pilgrims from throughout the underworld crammed into the aisles, balconies, and any remaining spaces they could stand. I could feel their eyes upon me, Hacktor squirmed. Why didn't they just stay home? Iztok isn't the place for lukewarm souls. Although Hacktor had already been at Iztok, most of the crowd had left their palaces and homes many days before to travel here, making the journey entirely underground thanks to the engineering marvel known as the Drokka byways, an elaborate system of natural and man-made tunnels that connected the various Drokka kingdoms that dotted the far reaches of the Rhokii Mountains, and the network that supported the east-west trade routes of Terverde proper. Iztok, my home, until today. Hacktor couldn't help but reminisce about the place he'd lived since he was 8 years old, the place where he'd been instructed in the tenets of the faith by Mirker, and where he'd learned the arts of war from Heracles, neither of whom my father ever wanted for my teachers. Now, what Hacktor didn't think about, what he tried hard to push to the back of his mind, was that Hacktor had been abused by both of the men he so admired. Mirker had not only taken advantage of the 8-year-old Hacktor and brainwashed him into a warmongering zealot, but he'd also poisoned Hacktor's mind against his father. And as if that wasn't enough, Mirker had also made Hacktor his catabite, sexually abusing the poor boy to further dominate him and ensuring that he'd always be in command over him. Shocking as it may sound, none of this was hidden or even frowned upon. Instead, Hacktor was envied for his station as Mirker's beloved, a rite of passage, quote-unquote, enjoyed by the most worthy of alkalites. And then there was Heracles. Although he was the general of Mirker's holy armies at Iztok, he was too much a man of the world to let religion stop him from enjoying life. Heracles drank, smoked, fought, gambled, and whored, and he introduced Hacktor to all of these vices before Hacktor even reached 13. With all this going on, Hacktor did his best to make sense of the world, but let's face it, the boy really had no chance, did he? Oh, and I guess I should mention that everything Mirker and Heracles did was pretty much orchestrated by me as their puppet master. But then I'm sure you already knew that, right?
Praise be to Rhokii, the maker of stone and wood.
Rhokii. Oh, don't get me started on that fool. I already told you that Drokka foolishly devised their whole religious system around him, even though Rhokii had long since stopped paying attention to his people. Meanwhile, the crowd replied, And to Calypso, our mother, giver of life. By the way, Calypso was the Drokka's name for Gaia. In their religion, she served the role of goddess of fertility. Little did they know what Lucifer and I once did to her. These opening prayers to honor the gods continued for some time, for even though this day was about Ajax, the Drokka were wary of offending the gods without giving them their just due first. For all the good it did them, for Rhokii and Gaia had long since forgotten about them, as I've already told you. These people would have been better off spending their time worshipping me again, although I probably wouldn't have helped them either. Meanwhile, the ceremony on Mining Day was the longest religious service of the year, spanning multiple candle marks, and there was plenty of time spent honoring Ajax's exploits too. Now for his part, Hacktor tried to overcome the awkwardness that came from sitting so close to his father, a person he'd grown so far apart from, and instead Hacktor focused on the prayers. He rose and sat, leading the crowd with the necessary replies, yet soon enough he could feel his blood start to boil again. This time, it wasn't just the queer vibes that came from Baldar, for Hacktor knew what else was coming. The readings. As if on cue, Mirker took a seat, parking himself on a throne-like chair upon the dais facing the crowd. Have you ever wondered why do high priests, for any religion, always claim to be servants of the people, and then inevitably end up sitting on thrones like this, glorifying themselves far above the people they claim to serve? Behind Mirker was the altar, itself upon a higher dais, and Hacktor had served countless times around that altar, and he knew the holy table firsthand. It was a massive structure with walls sculpted from the darkest obsidian, and it always seemed to Hacktor that the exterior of the altar pulsed with a living blackness that came from the heart of the giant stone it was crafted from centuries before. Triangular horns of Rhokii, nearly a foot high, graced the four corners of the altar, the gemstones giving off a rainbow of ever-changing colors. Meanwhile, and more importantly, blazes from the eternal flame within the table's center ever licked the airs above, a constant reminder to the Drokka that the gods were present within this holy hall. As if the gods really cared about such poppycock. Men and boys were in constant motion around the altar, all except Merkur. Yet even though the high priest merely sat upon his chair, it was he who stood out the most. With a fluffy beard as white as snow, one that reached down to his waist, Merkur's facial hair marked a stark contrast to the deep, sable color of his priestly garments. Merkur's robes were the darkest of any of the clergymen around the altar, as befitted the wise one of his station. Ha! Black robes, claiming to be wise. Seriously, why must everybody steal from me? Well, perhaps I should take it as a compliment. After all, mimicry is the sincerest form of flattery, right? Now, despite Merkur's age, Hacktor knew he had more than 80 winters under his belt. Merkur was still hale and strong. His grip on my shoulder when I do wrong is like a vice, Hacktor recalled, and the slap he gave me just yesterday still stings. For a moment, Hacktor felt the elderly priest's eyes upon him, practically boring a hole into him. Yet just as quickly the sight was gone, as alkalites began their slow march around the holy area with censers filled with fragrant incense, thus quickly shrouding Merkur, the altar, and everything around him in a murky haze. From out of these mists, the lector began to read from the Nebon Gilgalad, that sacred poem by Snorri Sturluson that told the epic history of the mountains, much of it about the exploits of Ajax and his successful campaign to free the Drokka from the Durka's vile grip. While many in the crowd soon found themselves bored by the lector's drone of a story they'd heard countless times before, Hacktor drank in every word. For Ajax was Hacktor's hero, and if truth be told, the historical figure whose legendary feats Hacktor himself hoped to eclipse one day. Now, before you think Hacktor was an egomaniac, such a desire was not as egotistical as it might seem. Instead, it was merely a matter of course, for Hacktor was a Valkyrie, the first in nearly a century, and most importantly, the first among the royal family since Ajax himself, or so the Drokka Chronicles said. Let's see. Prideful? Check. Special birth? Check. Dissatisfied heir to the royal throne? Check. Are you starting to see why I had such high hopes for Hacktor? As a Valkyrie, under the tutelage of Merkur the Wise, Hacktor had successfully talked with the gods. In his case, just one so far, and I think you'll be amused when you find out who. For the deity that spoke with Hacktor was the one that had first told him about his future greatness. As if being a future heir was not enough, Hacktor was also born with the Mark of the Valkyrie. Yet for reasons Hacktor still didn't understand or accept, his father Baldar had kept that fact hidden for most of his childhood. None within the Drokka world knew about Hacktor's mark, save Baldar, Hacktor's twin sister Hekla, and Hacktor's personal valet. Well, nobody knew until one day when one of the high priest's servants had discovered the truth about Hacktor while posing as a royal valet to the prince. For Merkur claimed he had always known Hacktor was special and therefore justified his covert operation behind the High King's back, much to Baldar's displeasure. Okay, it's possible Merkur may have been tipped off, but you didn't hear that from me. Yet once Hacktor's secret was out, there was naught Baldar could do to deny it, or more importantly, to prevent a then 8-year-old Hacktor from being taken away from the palace and raised within the faith by Merkur and his minions. Which was exactly where I wanted him. Baldar was aghast at losing Hacktor to Merkur's clutches. Hekla was distraught at losing her twin, but Merkur was delighted, and not just because he cared about Hacktor's soul. Now, the good news was that Hacktor's dislocation from court did not interfere with his status as the heir to the throne. In fact, his status as a Valkyrie, a royal Valkyrie who had the full power and endorsement of the faith behind him, only strengthened Hacktor's claim and proactively squelched any power play that may have later come from Bran or any of Hacktor's other half-siblings when the throne became available. And so, as the church service dragged on, Hacktor focused his attention again on the readings, with the lector continuing the tale of Ajax's legendary deeds.
And Ajax said to Bashamel, "Thus says Rhokii, Lord of the Mountains, the time has come, let my people go, that they may serve me." Yet with a wave of his hand, Bashamel, Marduk of the Drokka, refused. At this the Marduk's aide addressed Ajax, "So let it be that Bashamel, Grand Marduk of the Drokka, King of all Gore and supreme ruler of the West, has spoken, and these are his words. The Drokka are my people, my property, and so they shall remain. That includes you, Ajax, for you are naught but a puffed-up slave. Who are you to speak for a god?" Yet Ajax would not be dismissed so easily, and he warned the Marduk's court, "If you refuse me, what happens next is on your head." And Ajax stormed out, while the Drokka laughed at his departure.
They weren't laughing when Rhokii caused the weevils to destroy their fields, or the reeds to clog their drinking water, or when any of the other perils were cast upon them. Yes, Hacktor knew the rest of the story before the lector even read it. Yet he also knew that it wasn't until Ajax unleashed the hammer of Rhokii that Bashamel supposedly relinquished his grip upon the Drokka. For who can withstand a plague upon the firstborn? Who can withstand the hammer of a god? Actually, there was a very good scientific explanation for each of these so-called plagues that the god Rhokii allegedly released. And here's a hint. Rhokii didn't lift a finger to help the Drokka back then. Remind me when I have time and I'll tell you the true story sometime. Meanwhile, the lector continued reading.
"Yet even after Bashamel had agreed to free the Drokka, even still the Drokka king dealt treacherously with Rhokii's chosen people. For the Grand Marduk changed his heart and made ready his army to chase the fleeing Drokka and shackle them as slaves again, until Ajax cried out to the Lord to save them."
Oh boy, this stuff makes me sick. I mean, how many times can you people recycle the same myths over and over and over? Doesn't anybody have any imagination among you humans? My mind went back to Hacktor as I caught him thinking. Even though Ajax won our freedom lo those many years ago, where does that leave us now? We might as well still call the Drokka master, since it is the Marduk and his people who control the Blackwood, and therefore us too. Why can't my people open their eyes and see that we are still slaves? And Hacktor's mouth filled with bile at the thought. And while it was true that he had never been a slave himself, even still he fumed at And I loved it that Hacktor got angry, because his anger was something I could use. Yet despite the depths of Hacktor's emotions, he knew others in the crowd felt differently, for Baldur's reforms during the last 50 years had transformed international relations with their rivals, and the Drokka were now the Drokka's most important trade partner. In addition, Baldur himself had actually taken a Drokka woman for one of his wives. And not just any slaver either, but Gawain, the daughter of Garrick of the Golden Hand, the current Grand Marduk of the Drokka. What can I say? My webs were well crafted. I still can't believe my father married her, Hacktor fumed. Praise be to Rhokii that she is not here today. If Merkur didn't behead her, I certainly would have. Now, Hacktor's own mother, Vilma, had died giving birth to him and his twin sister, Hekla. Although he'd never known his mother, Hacktor distinctly recalled the fact that Baldur had only one wife when he first rose to power. As is only natural, Hacktor thought. His nanny and many of the servants often spoke of how Baldur loved Vilma deeply, and that the king lost more than just a wife or queen on the day Vilma died. He'd lost his heart, too. Mists clouded the memories of early childhood now, and thus Hacktor struggled to reconcile the wispy visions of a happy family life with Baldur and Hekla when it was just the three of them, because those hazy mental pictures didn't mesh with how events had played out, nor how Hacktor felt currently. By the time Hacktor turned 5, Balder had taken a new wife, Corrine, the daughter of Bane, the heir of Keldekaba, the military capital of the 8 kingdoms, a move clearly done to secure support for Balder's then shaky grip on the throne. For although each kingdom had its own army, and the Coneheir was, at least by right, the royal commander of all of these forces, Bane commanded the majority of the Drokka army. Thus, solidifying the Keldekaba heir's backing was a wise move by Balder. I wonder who gave him that idea. Yet, within a year, the High King shocked the court and the entire underworld when he announced that he was taking another wife, and additionally that he was starting a royal harem. The first Coneheir to do so in 3 centuries, for the practice had long since been outlawed by the faith. How did my father manage to keep Bane on his side after that insult? Hacktor wondered again. And how did he withstand Myrkur's inquisition about the sinful practice of a harem? Hacktor was too young at the time to wonder about such things back then, but since royal diplomacy was soon to be his world, he pondered the dilemma now. Perhaps in time he would have his answer. Nonetheless, somehow Balder had convinced his council that the practice would be good for diplomacy. Although that still didn't answer how he'd escaped Myrkur's condemnation. Perhaps there was another force at play behind the scenes, eh? In any event, over time, Balder did manage to build his harem, soon taking in wives from each of the power families within the underworld, and then stretching his scope beyond, to the outside, to the others. The first of the overworld queens to join the harem was a girl from Agaria, a potential trading partner east of the Rhokii Mountains. There soon followed more from nearby lands, and since trade did indeed improve after each of these moves, with ever more overworlders using the Drokka byways and thus paying the Drokka's taxes to move their goods to the west, the Drokka people did benefit by enjoying the fruits of these international relationships. Therefore, none could argue that Balder was successful with his reforms. But surely no one could have foreseen that he would dare to marry a Drokka. None except the master behind the plan, that is. Hacktor was 14 when Myrkur told him about his father's most egregious sin, Gawain. When he'd first come to Iztok, Hacktor immediately came to understand that Myrkur did not approve of his father, something he was not aware of before he'd become the high priest's disciple. Yet in that first year, Hacktor was told that Balder had committed many sins against the faith, at least according to Myrkur. At first, Hacktor didn't believe the high priest's charges, but the more time he spent as Myrkur's acolyte, the more he found himself unable to deny Myrkur's wisdom. As for Gawain, despite Balder's success in using his marriages to improve trade relationships, it was common knowledge that his entire council was against the High King marrying a Drokka. Yet Balder was relentless when it came to something he believed in, and he was dead set on marrying one of his sworn enemy's daughters. In the end, he succeeded in negotiating the marriage with Gran Marduk Garrick, and he married Gawain some 4 years past, although the ceremony was a private affair and quite unsanctioned by Myrkur or the faith. Ah, Discord, how I love thee. Rumors abounded about Gawain, and some had even reached Hacktor's ears. Unlike the other women who made up Balder's harem and lived in luxury a few floors below Balder's apartments, the king apparently housed Gawain separately, in her own royal chambers, which adjoined with his. In fact, ever since her arrival, rumors about the breakup of the royal harem had run rampant throughout the palace at Rhokii Pass, for it seemed that Balder rarely invited anyone but Gawain to spend time with him now. Hacktor had heard that Gawain was in her early 20s and beautiful beyond compare, and that Balder, now nearly thrice her age, was totally infatuated with the sight of her. Or perhaps he's infatuated with what's between her legs, eh? Hacktor spat. How could my father do this to us, to willingly bring a Drokka woman into our kingdom? Who's to say she's not a spy, telling Garrick about all she sees? Hacktor's eyes now scanned surreptitiously to his left, to his father. At 4.5 feet tall, although Balder was above average height for a Drokka, the king was a runt of a man compared to Hacktor, who was nearly a foot taller and at least a stone heavier. Behold, a king who refuses to lead his warriors into battle, and yet he actually has the gall to sit there in military garb? Hacktor's mind raged at seeing his father's outfit. Upon his head, Baldur wore a steel half-helm, burnished a royal black blue, and complete with a multicolored ostrich plume. A velvet blue cape graced his shoulders. Steel greaves, also burnished black blue, covered his wrists, and upon his chest sat a priceless breastplate made of the finest Rhokii gemstones, making his armor nigh impenetrable. Ha! I've earned my warrior's stripes under Heracles' secret campaigns, yet my father's armor puts mine to shame. Hacktor couldn't stand to look any more. And although Hacktor wasn't wearing a helm, greaves, or other armor, Hacktor's station as both a prince and a de facto general in the Drokka's army fit with his desire to dress accordingly, and as such his hand involuntarily went to the exquisite golden plate mail that covered his own torso, it too a priceless work of art, with the relief of 2 Drokka battle axes crisscrossed on the front. Yet it was nothing compared to the ever-changing rainbow of colors that his father's breastplate gave off. Yet everybody here knows Baldur has never lifted an axe in his life, not even to split a stone. Why, the man looks like a complete fool. Hacktor could barely hide his disgust. For his part, Baldur spied his son's gaze and smiled warmly back at Hacktor. "Ah, if that man only knew how much I hated him," Hacktor faked a smile back. "You are a coward, father, and one day you will die because of it. Baldur the bold? More like Baldur the bashful, if you ask me. What has he done but further subject us to the Drokka's control?" In Hacktor's mind, cone-haired Drokkas were defined by their glory on the battlefield, not the business room or the bedroom. His mind harkened back to other cone-haired Drokkas of ages past. Volsung, the first Drokka to ever die in battle. Birkin, the right hand of Rhokii. And of course Ajax, our deliverer and the inventor of war itself. These are the cone-hairs who glorified themselves on the battlefield. These are the cone-hairs whom history remembers, not some Doolittle king who shies away from battle at every turn and marries the daughters of our most hated enemies. Despite the blackwood fires that burned within the altar and in alcoves around the edges of the cavern, and despite the mass of humanity that was crammed into every available space, the grand cathedral itself was cold. Everything in these mountains are cold, Hacktor's mind wandered. It makes no sense. It makes me wonder if it's true that we are supposedly closer to the center of the earth and the fires of Baal at its core. If so, why is it cold? Hacktor had never understood that paradox. Were the fires of Caucasus caused by the Dark Lord, or were they meant to keep him locked inside? Nobody had ever given Hacktor a solid answer to that question, and the mystery often frustrated him. Perhaps when the Ragnarok comes, then I will finally have my answer. Hacktor's thoughts were interrupted when his younger brother Bran broke his concentration with a nudge and whispered into Hacktor's ear. "Did you hear what they're having for dinner after this?" At 12, the boy was 6 years Hacktor's junior, yet it might as well have been 50 years for all that Hacktor cared. "Don't care," Hacktor grumbled back. "Mutton," Bran sighed. "Might as well be nothing. Oh, why's it gotta be mutton again?" "Shh!" Hacktor elbowed his brother back. "It's always mutton on mining day, you fool. Now keep quiet." The ceremony continued for some time more, as is the norm for festivals of this type, regardless of the religion. And all the while Hacktor's mood continued to darken. "One day, father, I will be in control of our people, and then we will see greatness again." Eventually, after it seemed like half the Nebon Gilgalad had been read and most of the crowd had already fallen asleep, including King Baldur, finally Merkur the Wise rose from his chair and initiated the closing prayer.
"Oh, that the salvation for the Drokka will come from our Lord. Let Rhokii restore the fortunes of Oz. Let Ajax rise again and destroy the evil ones. Oh, Rhokii, we beseech you."
Hacktor and the crowds prayed, rising again. Merkur's chants droned on for nearly a candlemark more, until at last the old man said,
"Hear our prayers, O God. Vindicate us with your might."
Hacktor recognized the final verses. The time has come. The future is now, he thought.
"Challenge not the Drokka!"
Merkur suddenly roared, banging the gong with all his might.
"For Rhokii is our God!"
Hacktor and the people boomed in reply, finally ending the service. About time, right? and opening the door for Hacktor to step forward into his destiny. I don't know about you, but church services like this always make me exhausted. How about we turn the tables? I'm going to let you in on a little vision I saw with Hacktor confronting his father. Care to listen in? Well, you'll have to wait till the next chapter. In the meantime, I encourage you to go to my website, apocryphaofazazel.com, and sign up to join my free book club. Not only will you get notified when new chapters are released, but if you can't wait, you can read every chapter of this book online right now. So go to apocryphaofazazel.com. Until next time, my friends, this is Azazel saying, don't call for me. I very well may show up.